Why is it wrong to kick a dog, but perfectly normal to eat a pig? Now, before you click off, I'm not asking that to make anyone feel guilty or to tell you how you should live your life. I'm asking because it's a question I've spent years wrestling with. And after a long time thinking about it, I still don't have the perfect answer. But I have reached one conclusion that I keep coming back to. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, which I'll put a link up to a playlist here, you'll know that I've been trying to build a moral framework. Not one that's perfect, just one that's at least internally consistent for me. One that's honest about trade-offs, and one that I can actually apply to real life. And there's 3 values that I keep coming back to: minimizing suffering, maximizing flourishing, and preserving future flourishing. So today, I want to stress test that framework. Not with politics, not with religion, not with economics, but with one of the topics I found most uncomfortable: animal ethics. Now, if you told me 6 years ago just how passionate I'd be about animal ethics, I probably would have laughed in your face and then gone to order a chicken burger. It just wasn't something that I'd thought about, and definitely not something I thought to be important. And then one day, I don't remember why, I watched some documentaries. And they were Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, and A Life on Our Planet by the legend that is David Attenborough. And this is where I wish I could say that I'd watched those documentaries, thought, that's interesting, and then gone about my day. But that's not what happened. I was shocked. Not just by what I'd learned, but by the fact that I'd gone my whole life without questioning where the food on my plate had actually come from. It felt like discovering something that had been hidden in plain sight. The kind of truth that once you've seen, you can't unsee. And trust me, I tried. And then, almost by accident, I made everything 1,000 times worse. Because while I was watching these documentaries, I was also studying biology, evolution, animal behavior, ecology. And suddenly, those 2 worlds started colliding. Because one of the biggest things that biology changed for me was how I started to see our place in nature. You see, biology doesn't see humans as sitting above the rest of life. It sees us as part of it, just one branch on an enormous evolutionary tree. Not the destination, not evolution's masterpiece, just one branch among millions. Every species alive today has survived the same 4 billion years of evolution, each shaped by natural selection, and each having evolved extraordinary ways of surviving in their own environment. And perhaps most importantly, many of them experiencing the world in ways much closer to us humans than we often like to admit. They form relationships, they care for their young, they learn, they remember, they grieve. Now, does that make every animal morally equivalent to humans? No. I don't think morality is anywhere near that simple. Different beings clearly have different capabilities, different levels of awareness, different levels of intelligence. And I'm not saying that moral worth is as binary as that. But this is where people usually jump in and say, well, where do you draw the line? At humans? Chimpanzees? Dogs? Pigs? Fish? Insects? Plants? And honestly, I think those are fascinating questions. Don't get me wrong. But I also think we use them to avoid asking a much more obvious one. Because wherever you think that line should be, I really struggle to believe it begins after cows, after pigs, after sheep, after chickens. Animals that clearly feel pain, experience fear, and try desperately to avoid suffering. So I just think that before we spend hours debating the nerve endings of insects, or oysters, or plankton, we should first ask whether we're already getting the more obvious cases completely wrong. And that's what led me to really start looking more closely at modern animal agriculture. And this is where things become much harder to ignore. Factory farming, selective breeding, dairy cows being repeatedly impregnated just so they can produce more milk, baby calves being separated from their mothers at birth, male chicks being immediately crushed to death because they don't produce eggs, animals spending their entire lives in environments that bear almost no resemblance to the ones that they evolved to be in. And what struck me more wasn't that these things were happening, It was just how normal they'd become, how effectively they disappeared from public view, how easy it was to enjoy the final product without ever thinking about the process that created it. And this is where I kept getting stuck. Because if eating meat was genuinely necessary, this would be a completely different conversation. If it were a choice between surviving or not surviving, then I'd completely understand. But the more I looked into it, the less I could convince myself that it was about necessity. It wasn't survival. It was preference, taste, habit, convenience. And for me, this completely changed the moral equation. Because at least here in the UK, it's never been easier to have a fully balanced vegan diet. So the question slowly changed. It stopped being, can we avoid causing this suffering? And became, why aren't we? And believe me, I wanted a good answer to that question. Because the alternative meant changing my own life. And that would have been much less convenient. So anyway, the more I learned, the more everything started connecting together. The suffering of the animals, the habitats being destroyed, the forests being cleared, the biodiversity being lost. Even during my own dissertation in Madagascar, I was watching habitats being destroyed and converted to agriculture. And suddenly, this wasn't just about animal welfare. It was also about protecting future generations. And that's exactly the sort of thing I've built my moral framework to act towards. Now, none of this means that I think animal ethics is simple. Far from it. There are difficult questions everywhere. Animal testing, conservation, predators, medical research, crop deaths. These are all conversations worth having, and I don't want to undermine them. But I do think that sometimes they become a convenient way of avoiding the bigger question sitting right in front of us. Because morality isn't clear-cut. There are trade-offs everywhere. But reducing unnecessary suffering, that feels unusually clear to me. So, after years of thinking about it, I've never really managed to make eating meat consistent with the values I've tried to uphold. Reducing suffering, increasing flourishing, preserving future flourishing. That doesn't make me perfect. I don't want that to be the message that people think I'm trying to get across. I'm far from it. I'm still inconsistent in countless ways. I'm still learning and I'm still trying to improve. But I just wanted to be honest about where my reasoning had led me. Not because I expect everyone to agree, but because if I'm asking other people to question their assumptions, then I have to be willing to question my own. So maybe I'll leave you with the same question that changed my life. Not whether humans and animals are equal, not whether everyone should become vegan overnight, just this. If suffering is unnecessary, then what makes it justified? Because that's the question I couldn't stop asking. And maybe there's a justification I've missed. If there is, I'd genuinely love to hear it, because I've spent the last 5 years looking for one. But so far, I just haven't found an answer that sits comfortably with me. Right then, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And secondly, if you enjoy this kind of thinking and the conversations I have, then I'd love for you to stick around. I'm really hoping I can keep exploring questions like this for a while, but that sort of relies on people actually wanting to hear it. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.